Hi, my name is Amanda Murray, and I'm a veterinarian from the California Department of Food and Agriculture in the United States. Today, I'm going to talk to you about continuity of business during a transboundary animal disease and the lessons that we learned in California through implementation of our secure food supply program. So some of the topics that I'm going to cover are what continuity of business is in relation to the secure food supply program, a little bit on the recent virulent Newcastle disease outbreak that we had in California, and some of the successes, challenges, and lessons that we learned during implementation of the program. So first off, when we talk about continuity of business, we are looking at three main things. We're talking about animal welfare, basic operations, as well as commerce. When we think about animal welfare, we're talking about making sure that food gets onto a premises, or litter and bedding gets onto a premises, as well as waste is removed. Basic operations can be things such as essential and non-essential deliveries, propane, basic maintenance for the equipment. And of course, the ultimate goal of continuity of business is to resume commerce. Now, continuity of business happens with unaffected premises during an outbreak, and it is not business as usual. Again, we're trying to resume commerce, but it will not look the same. So the California Secure Food Supply Program is a state-run and organized program that has industry implementation at the premises level. We envision the program to be a shield that protects California agriculture during a transboundary animal disease outbreak and provides a pathway to economic survival for the industry through the permitted movement of animals and animal products. So again, the ultimate goal is to reach economic survival through permitted movement of animals and animal products. Our California program is based off of the national programs that are organized through the United States Department of Agriculture. In California, we have partnered closely with the USDA as well as several academic partners on the commodity-specific programs that you see there at the bottom of the screen. There's a separate presentation later on to go into those national programs, so I'm not going to cover that in depth. But what I would like you to know is that California's program takes into account everything that has been designed at the national level and then has tailored it to fit our state program. One of the things that we have done in California is that instead of focusing on a specific commodity, such as milk or poultry or eggs, is that we focus on specific farm and industry. So we have a poultry program, and we have a dairy program, and we're working on a beef program, etc. All of these, the hallmark is that we have started with a farm premises focus, thinking that if we can shore up the biosecurity at the farm level, then that is the most important thing that we need to protect. And that farm comes into contact with all the other aspects of the food supply chain, such as the processors, the feed mills, the haulers, of course, and the renderers when needed. So again, one of the things that is specific about the secure food supply is that it is premises focused. When we talk about the secure food supply program, the main elements are to have an enhanced biosecurity on the premises, and that can include the vehicles as well. And so it's establishing your perimeter, it's cleaning and disinfection of the vehicles, as well as there's active and passive surveillance, there's active record keeping and training requirements, and then ultimately we want to get to the point where we can manage movement through permits. So when we look at California kind of in the early part of 2018, we had been working with the National Secure Food Supply Group since the early 2000s. We were really involved in the Secure Milk Supply Program as well as the Secure Poultry programs. In California, we had broad concepts of what the California program would look like and what those elements were that we wanted to expand upon from the national program into our California program. We had given many industry presentations and workshops trying to socialize the Secure Food Supply Program and really get our industry on board with what this would look like during an outbreak. What kinds of requirements would we have at the state level? A couple things to point out is that the poultry industry already has good daily biosecurity, and a lot of that is geared towards food safety to prevent salmonella. And the large commercial operations do have strong biosecurity plans, both for food safety as well as disease control. So now I'm going to switch gears for just a little bit, and I'm going to talk about V&D in California. We have had 3 outbreaks in the same general geographic region of Southern California. The first was in 1974, and then again in 2002 to 2003, and then the most recent one in 2018 to 2020. During the most recent outbreak, we created a regional quarantine area that encompassed more than 240,000 premises. Over the course of the 2 years, we had 500 infected premises, but only 10 of those actually produced eggs to sell, and of those 10, only a few of them were large commercial operations. In this region in California, it was predominantly the egg layer industry that was impacted by V&D. In addition to that, there was also a lot of impact on backyard poultry. In this region, the backyard poultry ranges anywhere from game fowl, as demonstrated by the rooster over on the bottom right, to hobby farms and backyard pets. Another tricky part about this region is the semi-urban setting. In this area, there's been a lot of encroachment and urbanization into the agricultural sector. So you can see from this photo on the bottom that there are poultry farms, there's a large one there in the middle, surrounded by houses and neighborhoods. There's some mixed farms there with a variety of animals. So it was a very difficult setting in which to try to identify and isolate and remove the virus. I'd like to now talk about some of the challenges that we faced with implementing the Secure Food Supply Program during V&D. One of the main challenges that we found was just in preventing disease. Preventing the introduction of a highly transmissible virus like V&D is a lot harder than other diseases such as salmonella. And this requires a different level of biosecurity. It's much more comprehensive than the day-to-day biosecurity, say for food safety, than it is when you're looking at stopping a virus spreading amongst farms. And again, we're going to touch on this unique semi-urban space that we were in, because that was a big barrier to disease prevention. So I'm going to walk through another example of one of these urban farms and situations. So here is a poultry operation going on a premises. And if we zoom out, we can see that the actual poultry operation there in the lower left corner is really far away from the public road, which is over on the right in the orange circle. So doing a drive-by of this property would give you no indication that this poultry operation was in existence there back in the far corner. And to make matters even more complicated, so if we zoom out even further, is that this backyard poultry operation is only 586 feet from another poultry farm. And so it was very difficult to see and or test for disease in some of these places. Coming into V&D, we had a relatively small secure food supply program. We had identified key elements and ideas of the program, and again, those were based off of the national program. We had identified California's specific biosecurity requirements and our standards, and we had developed some plan templates so that producers could build a biosecurity plan that was in line with our requirements and standards. But we lacked standard operating procedures for audits and permits, and we hadn't done a whole lot of socialization of getting our plan template out to the industry. When we looked at enhanced biosecurity plans, some of the challenges that we faced with this outbreak in particular was that our regulatory staff really had to write the majority, if not all, of the plans. This was not our intention and is not our plan moving forward. But what we found was that many of the producers, and especially the small independent farms, were just not ready and didn't have the resources to write the plans. We found they were very time and labor intensive. And that the devil is in the details. So these plans really have to be very specific. It's not sufficient just to say they have a perimeter. They have to spell out where the perimeter is, what's on the inside, and what's on the outside. And it became really apparent that what's important in the plan is not just saying what they're going to do, but how are they going to do it? Who is going to do the biosecurity mitigation, and how is it going to be implemented? We also discovered that the farm owner or manager might have one perception of the biosecurity that's being implemented on the farm, but what the employees are actually doing on a day-to-day basis may be quite different. So it was really important to convey to the farm management that they had to be on site or have some sort of implementation practices and training to make sure that the employees were following through with the plan. And as I mentioned, this all takes a significant investment in time and resources, both to develop as well as implement these biosecurity. As we look to successes of the Secure Food Supply Program during V&D, there were quite a few, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the more relevant ones for this talk. One of the main ones was that it worked. So we discovered that enhanced and enforced biosecurity, surveillance, and movement permitting works. In comparing the 2002-2003 outbreak to the 2018-2020 outbreak, we can see that the early 2000s, that outbreak lasted 9 months, and there were 22 commercial production farms that were infected during that outbreak, and we had evidence of farm-to-farm spread. Whereas in the most recent outbreak, this one lasted 21 months, we only had 10 farms that produce eggs that were for sale became infected, and of those, only 3 or 4 were considered truly commercial operations, and we had no evidence of farm-to-farm spread. So again, enhanced and enforced biosecurity, surveillance, and movement permitting worked to keep the virus from spreading amongst commercial property. Some of the statistics coming out of the outbreak: we developed 58 plans, we issued over 1,400 permits, and the program evolved over the course of the 2 years. We added a new section to the incident management team to address commercial needs. Within that section is where we had the permitting unit, we had a unit who was writing and evaluating plans, we had people who were developing SOPs, we had epidemiologists, and we had case managers who were assigned to work directly with the commercial operations to help them with any aspect of the preparedness and prevention that they needed. And we also expanded our process flow. So the flow went something like this. The first step is the plan development, review, and approval. We had an extensive review process where every plan that was written was reviewed by biosecurity specialists and or epidemiologists to make sure that the plan was consistent with California's standards and requirements, as well as that all of the identified risks have been mitigated. Once written and approved, then the plan had to be activated, meaning that all the biosecurity had to be implemented. And then we would send out some of our staff to verify that the plan was activated as it had been written. We implemented a sampling procedure where the producers were mailed kits, and they were to sample their birds twice a week and send in the samples to the lab. And then we conducted audits every 2 weeks to make sure that the biosecurity practices were still in place and that sampling was happening. The producers also had to submit any movement logs and health records. And all of this had to be done in order to receive a permit as well as to keep those permits coming. If any of the aspects in this flow were not working, then the permits would be pulled and the producer would have to resume the correct practices in order to get their permits issued again. Similar to successes, we had a lot of lessons learned coming out of V&D. However, today I'm just going to highlight a few of the lessons that we learned that were relevant to implementation of the Secure Food Supply Program. The written plan really is critical to success. The written plan creates an agreement between Animal Health Regulatory Agency and farm management ahead of time. And this is really important so that everybody can agree to what the risks are on an individual premises and agree to the mitigation strategies. Now, of course, some of those things may change during an incident and in the heat of the moment, but at least some of the discussions and some of the agreements have already been reached ahead of time. If the goal is to get to pre-approval, rapid activation, and immediate return to moving product, then again, that written plan is really the most important step. Another challenge was really understanding that each premises has its unique risks. There was such huge variability amongst the different premises that we needed to do a close evaluation of every site and assess the risks so that we could recommend mitigation. A lot of the premises were mixed operations. The one down on the bottom had a produce farm on the same premises as the poultry farm, so we wanted to separate those operations. Other instances, like up in on the right-hand side there, show the location of the birds under the shade of the trees, which is nice to keep them cool, but then prevented we couldn't really separate the harborage and maybe keep out rodents or other controls as easily as we might in some other farms. We had a lot of mixed-use premises where there might be a poultry operation, there might be an egg layer operation, and then a small roadside stand where they sold the eggs up front. There might be processors on the same property where it could be nest-run eggs or it could be processed eggs. So all of these things had to be taken into account when we were looking at biosecurity plans. One of the other things we also realized is we did not want to be the ones to dictate the mitigation. The producers could often come up with their own really creative and practical solutions. And if they came up with their own solutions, there was much better buy-in for implementation than if we tried to dictate what they should do. So our role was really to identify the risks, and if needed, we could suggest ideas for mitigation, but we really worked with the producers to come up with their own mitigation strategies. We also realized that we must enforce, and the enforcement had to happen through regular inspections. So again, going back to those audits that we did every 2 weeks, and the enforcement that had to follow suit with those. So we had special investigators. At times we had to call in law enforcement. And we had to get creative in how to preserve biosecurity. We didn't want our staff going on to all these premises all the time and potentially being exposed to the virus and spreading it. So one of the things that we developed and implemented was the use of virtual audits through cell phones or iPads so that a producer could walk us around the farm virtually and show us what we needed to see without us going on the premises so that we could stay clean. And lastly, one of the lessons we learned is that even the best plan can fail. There are a lot of reasons this can happen. You can have poor compliance. There can be unanticipated risks, right? We can plan the best that we can and things still happen. Politics sometimes get in the way, and then there can just be bad luck. The parrots at the bottom of this picture, of this slide, represent the fact that during the outbreak, the most recent outbreak, there were a lot more parrots that were noticed in the area. And one of the thoughts is that part of the spread of the virus could have been due to the parrots and where they were roosting. An example of the politics is there was a premises that had an egg production and a feed mill, and they put in a very expensive fence to separate the two operations with the intention that if one became positive that they could separate and keep the other half of their the other operation running. And in fact, the poultry production side did become infected. It was unknown how it became infected, but it did become infected. And despite all of the mitigation that they had and the separation of the two operations, it was ultimately decided by the IMT that the feed mill had to close down as well, and they could not continue in operation. So even though there was an agreement ahead of time and the producer did the best that they could, in the moment, a decision was made that the risk was too great. So again, even the best plan can fail. So I'd like to finish up my presentation with this idea that preparation and implementation of premises-level biosecurity is the cornerstone for continuity of business through compartmentalization. Compartmentalization can really only be successful when every aspect of the chain has tight biosecurity, and compartmentalization is only as strong as the weakest link. And with that, I would like to say thank you. It has truly been a pleasure to share our experiences with you all today.